began to think about my brother as to where was he? How is it that a life can just disappear so quickly? And so that brought me to the concept of God. Incredible concept that a God who made all this universe must have made it for a reason.
Hey Bruce, how are you?
Not too bad.
That's good. So tell us about your understanding of God as a young fella.
All right. As a young person, I wasn't particularly God conscious. I know that there are people that are like that, but I wasn't like that. I grew up in a happy home. I guess that really fixed a lot of things because I never really had anything that challenged my thinking that would bring up the concept of God. My concept of God was that of a Presbyterian church that I used to go to, which was for me fairly liturgical, and so it didn't really interest me at all in reality. But as time goes on, things change. Yeah.
So what sort of changed then as you, I guess, got into your teens, and what did life look like for you?
As I got older, I began to think more, and so with education came knowledge and also experience, and also a responsibility that came with it. And so as I grew older, I fell in love with words. It was my favourite subject at school. My father would teach me Latin roots to words and that sort of thing. So, excuse me, there's that really empowered me for what was going to happen in my life. And there's a hand behind all these things, even when you're young, even when you go through difficult times. There's a hand working all the time for a greater purpose. So,
So what was life like, or your view of God before you sort of came to know Him or understand Him, or when you first experienced or realized, oh, God is real?
yeah, that's a fairly complex process. My view of God was I was totally disinterested in Him. So if He was there and I had no I was basically not interested at all in religion or at all at God, about God, because I was having too good a time. uh, so what was behind that was I came from a happy home, and so I carried that over into my early teens, and I was very much involved in sport. I played every sport I could, and not realizing that that was where I was going to head later on. And so in that interim period, um, it was pretty well. It was heaven on earth in a sense. So because I love sport and I love being out. So
Your life was just consumed by sport and
yeah, my life
running
was
around.
absolutely consumed to sport, and I loved, as I said before, English. English was, and still words are my great love. And doesn't matter if it's Hebrew, Greek, English. I love language, and so that transferred very well into me. Yeah.
So then, how did God come and find you? When was the time He came, pursued you, and
Yeah, well, it goes back again to when I was about 13. I used to play sport. I was very good at it. Um, for instance, I used to play junior hockey, and when I was 14, they wanted to put me in the senior men's hockey team. And so they're happy to do it, but then they realised it's not a good move because I was only young, and I would have been in with a whole lot of big men who would have knocked me about pretty badly. So sport was it, and so it started in those days with sport of all kinds. I was playing 4 sports a week, and so I was absorbed until I started to play golf, and that even as an amateur, that changed my whole mindset. I was amongst men all the time. I wasn't amongst younger guys, but I was amongst older men, and that impacts on you very much so, and to a positive extent in my life. They left a good mark on me. Yeah.
Mm. So then, when did you start to realize about God and who He was and
Yeah, well, the big thing that changed my life was when I went away to boarding school. I think I was 16, 17, something like that. And so I was maturing in that time. And then when I got back out of boarding school, I realised when I was in boarding school, I wanted to play golf because that was one of the four sports I was playing. So I came back to my hometown, and I would start to practice golf. I started on a handicap of I think they put me on 21, and I got to scratch in 9 months. I used to hit 5 to 7,000 golf balls a week. I was absolutely obsessed with golf, and so I'd be out on the golf course, and all my life basically, 7 days a week I was out on a golf course. The thing that really brought me to a sense of faith was trauma, which is, I realise now, is designed by God in many respects, in that I had an older brother who took his life and shot himself in the head, which was absolutely traumatic for my family and for myself. I love my brother. He was mixing with some people who were not good people. They had a criminal background, and there was a disagreement, and I think the threat that hung over his head mentally drove him to suicide, and so he shot himself through his head. Excuse me. The impact of that was that I began to think about the possibility of God, and I began to think about my brother as to where was he? How is it that a life can just disappear so quickly? And so that brought me to the concept of God. And when I reached an emotional point where I had to have an answer, I had to have an answer. I'd be on the golf course, and all my studies would come back to me: physics, chemistry, biology. I'd be walking down the golf course, and I'd be looking at the sky, the vegetation, everything, and I began to realise that I was actually looking at a divine design. For instance, how does a plant take light and produce material that will feed a cow? That was just impossible to me. How is it that the electron around the nucleus of the atom spins at 187,000 miles per second? Scientists can't get a photograph of it, yet it holds the body, and literally the whole world together is held by the fact that the nucleus is surrounded by the electron, and it never breaks out of its orbit. And that's the way I was thinking at that age. So I was doing an analysis of my environment, and actually just simply looking at God, I realised I'm looking at God, God's design. I realised there was a God behind everything, and he was a genius beyond belief. And who could make something like this? And so that brought me to a faith, and essentially that's what drove me into looking into Christianity, because that's what I was basically, I wouldn't say I was indoctrinated, but that's all I had. That was my only point of reference. And
so where did you go from there, knowing, okay, God, you might be real, I can see your design everywhere.
yeah.
What did you do from there?
So from there, I went to a Presbyterian minister in the church that I grew up in, it was a different minister this time, a younger man, and I said to him, look, I think I believe in God, and I think I need to get sprinkled with that water, and and he said to me, and this has just blew me away. He said, "Oh, that's very good, Bruce." He said, "I don't believe in God, but I really admire your faith," and that just blew me away. I couldn't believe, how could a minister say I don't believe in God? And I said to him, what are you doing in this job? This doesn't make any sense. You don't believe in God and you're a minister. And this is back in the 60s and the 70s when, the hippie movement was starting and everything was about what you do socially and that sort of thing. And he said, I got out of university and then he said, I wanted to do something good for the world. And there were no positions left to study theology, and someone said to him, why don't you do social work? If you want to do something good in the world, do social services. Later on, he got his qualification, but he went and did the socialist, I don't know what they call it, a social services degree. So he got into the church on that basis, and actually he wasn't even born again, and he didn't even believe in God. And I said to him, how do you get a sermon? I was beginning to mock the guy in my heart in the end because it just seemed ridiculous. And I said to him, how do you get a sermon? And he reached down into his drawer and pulled up a book that thick and had 500 sermons for everything you could think about. It was all pre-written if you're a Presbyterian minister, which just was unreal. Anyway, I said to him, I don't care. I said, I just want to get sprinkled with that water. I didn't even know why. It seemed crazy to me. And so one night I went down to the church. There was 12 people in a church that could seat 400. And I went down, I got sprinkled, and at the end of the service, it was a very short service, and I started to walk back home where I lived, and past a pub that I used to drink in, and I realised it was like I was in a suit. I was in a foreign planet, and I was in a astronaut suit, and I could almost hear my breathing. And I realised that something had changed in my life. And so from that point of view, looking back at my brother's suicide, God had used it all to bring me to the point that I got to. And I was born again that night, and couldn't stop reading the Bible. Could not stop reading it. So really, that was really the catalyst that drove everything. It even replaced my love of golf, because I used to, as I said, hit 5,000 to 7,000 golf balls a week. Started on a handicap of whatever it was. They put me on 21. I got to scratch in 9 months. I got an offer to turn professional, and which I took. But in that same time frame, so many things happened within 12 months that my brother had taken his life, and then I wanted to get further studies on what happens in the afterlife and that sort of thing. So that's what pulled me into Christianity, and I went and did a theological course, and that was me. So,
And why do you follow him now, or what do you love about him now?
What really pulls me in is the incredible concept that God who made all this universe must have made it for a reason. And of course, when we look at Scripture, we see that God made it for Adam and Eve. And so that symbiotic relationship between God and man is the ultimate goal. But the thing that trips man always is his tendency to sin. And so you learn these things through time. The beauty of what is the beauty of Jesus is he'll never leave you, he'll never forsake you. And anything you do where you feel you've failed, and even if you have failed, he's already forgiven you. Already forgiven you.
Crazy.
So the love of God is the thing that really drives me. So today I'm out on the street witnessing, have done for 8 years, distributing Bibles, and I do it because I love the people. I don't do it for any other reason. No one, you don't get a lot of recognition when you, where I used to start, I started around the nightclubs in Melbourne and chasing all the kids trying to get a Bible in their hands, you know, thinking that they all want one, but they don't. And so I had a lot of people tell me where I could go in a very nice way, and it toughens you up. So, but I still do it and I still love it, and I hope I'm still doing it when I'm 90, and I'm really serious about that. I want to get a Bible in everyone's hands. And I feel sorry for the young people today. I grew up with a certain sense of values that young people don't have today. All their values are subjective. They're bound in animism. Many of their values are bound in animism. And they're being sold, what we would say when I was a kid, they're being sold a pup or a con. They're being conned. They're being told there is no God, and everything is subjective. And there's quite the opposite. So,
thanks for sharing, Bruce. Appreciate it.
That's okay. Thanks, mate.